So, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Film and TV Options, What Authors Should Know. This is an Authors Guild Foundation event in our ongoing series, Business Bootcamps for Writers, which is funded in part by the National Endowment for the Arts and by Penguin Random House. So, thank you to our sponsors for enabling us to put on free public programming like this. If you're not a member of the Authors Guild, please check out our website, authorsguild.org, to learn more about what we do. And definitely join the Guild before you sign a contract. Our lawyers will review it for you. Thanks to our audience for submitting questions in advance. We've prepared a talk that will address your most burning questions. We have a large crowd here, so I ask that you use the Q&A box if you want clarification or have a new question, but trust that we'll be covering the basics and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after the panelists have spoken for a bit. And with that, please welcome Cheryl Davis, General Counsel of the Authors Guild. Cheryl also writes for the stage and screen, so she knows a thing or two about Hollywood. And joining us is Caitlin DiMotta, partner at Cowan, Debates, Abrams, and Shepard. Caitlin began her career in 2006 as an entertainment and business lawyer. She works with clients on matters of acquisition, licensing, options, publishing agreements. Caitlin, thanks again for appearing at our AWP panel on contracts in Seattle, and we're so glad to have you here on this webinar.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Johnny. And I wanted to repeat the thanks again for Caitlin, and also to let people know that this is one of our many boot camps that we're doing. And for those who don't know a little bit about the Authors Guild, we have over 13,000 members in various writing disciplines. And we are glad to help authors in any way we can. And we're delighted to be discussing film and TV options with Caitlin, because we've been seeing that as a way in which authors can monetize their work. So, Caitlin, let's start from the very beginning, a very good place to start. How do producers get interested in a book to adapt for TV or film?
Frankly, the best way, right, is for the producers to read the material, find the material, read it themselves, and fall in love. That's typically how I, see offers coming in when they're coming in from an individual producer, a creative exec inside a TV studio, or a film producer. They find something, they go to bookstores, they read trade magazines, they wander into a comic book store, and they fall in love with the material, and they reach out to someone. One of the fascinating things that I observe is how people find me. Typically, it's because they've reached out directly to the author themselves. They have figured out, they've reached out to the publisher. The publisher has said, oh, this author is represented by Caitlin. You can find her here, or has an agent. You can find that agent here. And so eventually it finds its way to my desk, because the producer has fallen in love with the material and wants to know if the rights are available. And sometimes it's as simple as that. They say, hey, I've fallen in love with this book. I'd love to know if the rights are available. And then I say, yes, they are. Or I say, no, they're not. They're currently under option, and that option expires on X. And so please reach out to us if you're still interested at that time. So it's really as grassroots as it gets. They read. They love to read, believe it or not.
That is reassuring. I do want to caution, though, because a number of our authors have been approached by people pretending to be prominent directors and producers. For example, I'm not going to use a particular example, but very renowned directors who said, well, so-and-so emailed me and said he'd read my book, and I actually reached out to the so-and-so's representatives, and it was not the real very famous director.
What a weird world we live in, where people do that stuff. I mean, look, not every anyone can be a producer, right? Mm-hmm. They can say they're a producer. One of the things you can do to confirm is exactly what you did, Cheryl, for them, is say, let me just confirm that this is real. One of the things you can do is search IMDb. Typically, if a producer or a director or somebody has credits, they've done something before, you know, and they're not associated with a television studio or a network or something, you can look them up on IMDb and confirm that they're a real person, confirm that they have real credits. But, you know, one of the nice things about being a lawyer is that usually when people hear from me, they know that on behalf of an author, if they send an inquiry directly to the author and the author just forwards it to me and I respond, if they are a joker, I never hear a thing again. So that can be a way to sort of, agents know how to do this. Lawyers certainly were a little bit more frightening, I think, than agents are. So it's true. I'm sure it happens, and it certainly happened. You know, I have a not so nice word for the people that do that kind of thing, but you know, people get approached all the time and say like, oh, I love this. I would love to shop this. Usually those arrangements are accompanied by a big promise, lots of, you know, promises of what they can do with it, how much they love it, and how long, the longer the period of time they want to shop something and the less money attached to that period of time, the greater the likelihood that it's a nothing burger. However, that said, it is also completely normal for someone to say, look, I'd love to get, you know, I'm interested in this shopping this project. I would love to sort of talk with the, you know, creatively, take it around, pitch it. You know, those are things that I negotiate. They don't always have money or need to have money attached to them. If they don't, then they need to be very short at the time period. And they also need to be accompanied by a very specific list. Who did you show this to? Did you take it wide? Did you take it wide? Meaning, did you just spam this town with this pitch and attach your name to it? Or did they have like, listen, I know that, you know, this particular executive at Netflix is looking for this kind of thing. I'd love to take it into them, you know, and see if they're interested. That, in my mind, is it's targeted, it's specific, and it has there's a, you know, that's it, right? That's the extent of it. At the end of the day, they need you, the author, to say yes. No one can sell something of yours without your permission and your participation. So whether something is, you know, a nothing, or whether it has legs and there's a possibility, there's an opportunity there, time will tell. But usually the flakes get very scared off when I respond.
As well they should.
As they should. Yes, that's true. That's very true.
Now, Caitlin, you're talking about people finding you. Do authors need a you to help negotiate these agreements? Should maybe their agents can do it, or should they have an agent who has a specialty in film and TV rights, or can general agents also negotiate these kinds of deals?
You know, that's a really great question. I'll start from the top. Do they need a me? Well, I mean, maybe. I certainly think I add value because I do so many of these deals, and I see, you know, what is sort of standard from each and every buyer that's out there. And I can use that knowledge against the buyer. They're like, well, you gave me this on this other deal. You know, I have that too. But an agent, I would say, a literary agent for publishing depends on the shop. If you're at a place that is really focused on publishing and that's their main business, you may want to consider if somebody comes to you saying, I want to, let's say a director or a writer, which I think is the best in versus a producer. And I'll get to that. But let's say a writer or a director comes and says, I fell in love with your book. I want to develop this and pitch this. I want to direct this. I want to write the screenplay. One of the nice things having an agent on your side, a film and TV agent, is that they'll help navigate that sort of beginning development process. Do I think most film and TV agents here in town, I'm here in Los Angeles, by the way. Do I think that most of them are really good at their job? Yes, I do. I think film and TV agents who are experienced, that you have a personal connection to, that they connect with your material, they are your best advocate. And they can do and pitch your material to studios, networks, writers, directors, other clients of theirs in a way that I cannot. Under the law in California, lawyers, only agents are able to seek out employment. When it comes to intellectual property sales, I can do that from soup to nuts without an agent, but you might miss out on different opportunities for different buyers or different writers, or so the agents, their function is really to make those marriages that might make sense and might make it a more appealing package of talent, the IP, the writer, the director, the actor, for a studio to say yes, right? The whole point of all of this is getting all of the ways in which a studio or a network can get to yes. You don't want to throw up roadblocks for them to say no. So a film and TV agent who specializes in, that kind of adaptation is really important. And man, do I have people in this town that I absolutely adore and love working with, particularly people who are well-versed and understand like certain types of material, YA, comic books and graphic novels. Those are very unique properties. They're very unique in and of themselves, and the kinds of rights and legal issues that come up with those books, that they're having an agent that understands sort of how to present and how to position that material in the market is really key. Do I think that publishing agents don't have those skills? Absolutely not. I think it just depends on the shop. Some people really like their agency to do the one thing that they do and do it excellently. Great. And so if you're at a place, that maybe just does publishing, it is not a bad idea to get a film and TV agent, and they work together. They commission different things. Film and TV agents typically do not commission your publishing. And so if you have an agent for publishing and an agent for film and TV, you're not going to be paying double commission on those. Now, some some publishing agents do take the film and TV rights. That's getting less and less common because publishers are far more willing at this stage in our world to let authors reserve film and TV and merchandise and video games and comic books, even comic books and graphic novels. They're more willing to allow the author to reserve those rights. And so the publishing agent that's not really in their purview, right? Because they're reserved from the contract. So I would say, I think it's a great idea if you want a film and TV agent. I think that having a lawyer on your side, also, once the film and TV agent makes the deal, some are really great at negotiating some of the core terms, but at the end of the day, there's so much more that goes into an actual deal, and the devil is in the details. So I usually work in concert with agents on the publishing side. I work with agents on the film and TV side. So I end up doing the full negotiation and the full long form to make sure that there are no surprises. Some of the bigger agencies like UTA and CAA and WME and have lawyers on staff. They have legal affairs on staff. Having no disrespect to how wonderful that those lawyers are, the lawyer-client relationship operates outside of any other relationship you have. So there are things that clients can tell me, and I'm bound to keep confidential, and concerns they might have, desires they might have, vision they might have for their own project, that I can take into account into the negotiation, that maybe people don't feel comfortable or don't feel like they can tell their agent. So I'm not beholden to the agents, I'm beholden to the client. And so the lawyers that work for the agencies, in my opinion, they work for the agency. Their client is the
That's
agent.
their client.
Yeah. So I know that probably sounds a little self-serving. So.
Yeah, but you raised a lot of interesting issues and raised a lot of interesting points in what you were saying before. For example, I want to let people know that we actually have a template film agreement that we're putting, and we have on our website that we wanted to refer people to, and we're going to make little comments about it as we go through this presentation. But one of the points in this agreement is we talk about the property, what you're actually optioning to be adapted into film or TV. And when you talk about things that may be important to people, say if a person, it's important to somebody that they be able to continue working, including this character in their work throughout. Or if they have a tie to, if they really want a particular character to stay a particular race throughout the adaptation process. What can an author do if there are things that they want to carve out of this language about what's actually being optioned?
That's a great question. I think you said it earlier, and so I want to make sure I respond exactly to what you said. For example, if someone has a series of books, let's say it's a series of books that are in the same universe, right? So maybe the stories are each kind of standalone, but they might have characters that cross over. They don't have to necessarily be sequels or in a series, but I was reading, because I was feeling nostalgic, I was reading some of the old Harlan Coben, his fantastic standalone, really slutty beach reads where they just go really fast and you're kind of staying up all night reading. I was reading a couple of them from the early 2000s, and it was really funny because I didn't realize on the second time I've read both of these books, they share a villain. And these two random books are not necessarily, they're in the same universe, but they're not sequels, they're not related. They share a villain and they share a lawyer. And I thought, oh, that's so fascinating, because if you were going to adapt, what was the name of it? It was Tell No One and Just One Look. Two great books, great thrillers. And I thought, oh, if you were going to adapt just Tell No One, you would have to negotiate with when you're selling the rights, that the character, I think the villain's name was Eric Wu, that you would have to negotiate that this character appears in other books, and you reserve the right to use that character and have that character appear in these other books, the continued publishing rights to use that character, and also perhaps in the Tell No One rights deal, you would say, this character is named Eric Wu, but I'm reserving that character. You need to replace that character in your film or TV series with another similar character, but with a different name, because I want to retain the right to use this villain in other stories and potentially in other deals. Then if you option the rights to Just One Look, you'd have to do the same thing, right? So you can do that if your series, or if you're a series of, or several of your books, I'm trying not to use the word series because that's different, but several of your books might share, a baker, because they're in a town, this fictional town that you've created, and the stories themselves aren't related, but elements of them are. You can pull those out and say, I'm selling you all the rights and into, whatever these rights, and into the story Tell No One, and accept for the following characters on Schedule A. And you can kind of list them out and say, like, these are not for sale. You can carve them out, or you can replace them with a different person by a different name. The second question is an interesting one. This has come up a lot, kind of in the reverse, actually, in that I have some clients who are, well-established writers and have, book series, in the 25s, the series is like 25 books, over decades and decades. And they have said to me, look, I'm comfortable. I may have written this in the early 80s, and I might not have been as sensitive, and I just sort of did default, whatever, like I might not have done this. And, I love the impetus to say that I love that this cultural shift is here, but they'll say like, look, I'm okay if they change the gender, they change the race, they change for these characters. I'm not precious about it. In fact, I think that this would do better if they did. And some of that will come from the creative executive. When you're in a scenario where you're developing something with a buyer or with a studio or both, right? The creative executive might come to you and say, look, we love this character. Can we change their gender? Can we change their race? We think it would be more interesting in the sense that like it would add dimension and it would add opportunity. And there's, casting considerations to take into, that we think are important. And it's people want to see a reflection of themselves on the screen. Is this okay with you? That is a conversation that's happening a lot. And it's not just a matter of, that sort of weird thing of just like gender flipping and race flipping, just to sort of it's not a cynical thing. I'm not getting that from studios and creative execs. What I'm getting is a genuine desire to make sure that the material that they put on screen reflects the world and reflects and reaches the audience members and the widest audience they possibly can find. I haven't come across any author saying, I do not want them to change this character at all. That might, I don't know if that, I don't think that is indicative of anything other than my experience. I haven't represented everyone everywhere all the time, but I don't think that that's something that people are genuinely opposed to, so long as it comes from a place of inclusion, right? I don't think it would fly to say, this man is a white man and he needs to remain a white man, and I will not tolerate anyone not changing him from a white man. I don't know if that's a conversation that's certainly not a conversation I've heard. Certainly not, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
But yeah, Caitlin, I will tell you that we have had members express concerns the other way if they've written a book with a character of color and had producers come to them and say, we could sell it easier if it were just a white guy.
Ew. Well, it's funny that I don't doubt that that's happened. Mm-hmm. But that, to be perfectly honest, should make you run very far from that producer. Because what that tells you is something very important about the value system of the buyer or the person who's developing it. And again, I am not going to sit here and say that there aren't perfectly wonderful stories with white men as the protagonists. Like, that's fine. That's fine. But the idea that to change something from a person of color to someone that's not means that that the person saying that might not be connecting with the material in the way that is really important. So I think that's a bigger, broader philosophical question for the author to say, like, do I really want to put my material in the hands of somebody who does not understand, did not receive the message? Because all the choices you guys make as authors, all the choices that you make when you're building out a story, it's intentional,
Mhm.
right? They're not necessarily like I said, the only time I've ever experienced someone say like, I'm open to making this, more interesting, more adaptable, more inclusive. That's because it was sort of written at a time, it's older material, much older material, and it was written at a time where the default settings in people's brains, they just weren't aware of them. So I'm finding that it's more of a reflection of the person developing. It's like I said at the top about getting them to yes, right?
Mhm.
All the reasons that people want to get a studio or a network or a buyer to yes. If they're starting to throw up roadblocks of their own, like, oh, we can't sell this if with a woman leading, a leading woman. We know that's not true, right?
At least we should know that's not true at this point.
Yeah, and so that would sort of put off a red flag in my brain of like, well, then I don't know, who are you thinking of selling this to? What network are you selling this to? I would like to say I am a huge personal fan of romance novels, and I know that might get me kicked off this. I love them. I've loved them my whole life. I've read them for 25 years. And I would counter anybody saying, can we change this, character to a white person? I would counter that with Bridgerton.
Yeah.
I mean, good Lord, it has made that whole series come to life in a way that is so cool and so, brings people in instead of kind of keeps them away. So just think, if Shonda can do it,
yeah,
anyone can do it.
Now, I'd like to pull back a bit. You mentioned the term shopping early on. Like, so what is the difference between a shopping agreement and the kind of option agreement that we've got on our website, which has a fair number of points into it? What's the difference?
It's a great thing. And I think this is something we covered in the AWP in our presentation. And I'm glad we did it there. And so I'm glad you asked that. So the key piece for differentiating between an option agreement and a shopping agreement is who and what and for how long, right? So if a studio, an established studio is coming to you, and they are either the financing party or the network. So we live in a world where a lot of the distributors of content, especially in television, are also the studio creating the content. That's vertical integration for you. So if you're dealing with a Netflix or an Amazon or Paramount, or Disney, ABC, FX, any of those places that develop material in-house and then also have a distribution method, you're going to want to do an option because they have the money, they're the party that's developing it, and they're ultimately the party that's going to be distributing it. So you'll do a full option. That might be for, typically options are 12 months for a period, some chunk of money, or 18 months for a chunk of money. The difference of 12 versus 18 months depends on the material. If it's, particularly difficult material, or it's going to need a lot of pieces and a lot of development, you want to give them enough time, enough runway to actually do something with it. There used to be matter the time of year that someone would come to you, not so much anymore because we don't have as much emphasis on the broadcast season. So it can be any time, but in general, you want to give the people developing it time to get a script written, to find a writer, to get that person having a great pilot or a great feature script written. You want to give them enough time to find a director based on that script. Those things take time. So you want to give them enough time to do what they want. The question is for how much, right? An option is going to be, some percentage. Typically it's, I don't want to say there's a rule of thumb, but there's a rule of thumb of 10% of the purchase price. Now so if you have a $250,000 purchase price, you'll have a $25,000 option. They're related, right? They should be related. That can change depending on the material, depending on your leverage. But you know, a $5,000 to $10,000 option for 12 months, great. Totally great. You want to get a little bit higher if it's 18 months, but yet again, the real thing to think about is who wants to take control of this material. What are they going to do with it? How long do they need it for? If it's a studio or a buyer or a network, something like that, you want to do a full option and get it all done, because if they are developing it, they are the person deciding, we're going to greenlight this, we're going to exercise the purchase price. So for a shopping agreement, it's more typically something that an individual or a company producer will come and approach, right? So they can, or a writer or a director that also produces, you know, someone will fall in love with the material and approach and say, I'd like to develop a pitch, an angle, and go out and pitch to the studio buyers. And maybe if you have a writer, you know, it's a writer that you're connected with, the writer will want to write a treatment or something on spec, right? They're going to be committing their own time for free to do it, and then pitch that package.
Well, like they're creating a sales tool.
Yeah, correct, exactly. And a director will do that, a producer will do that, and a writer will do that. Should, right? So if all they're doing is taking your book around, I don't know why we need them, right? So they need to come up with some sort of extra something, some sales tool. I love that. It's true, to get the interest in the at the studio network or distributor level. And usually the shopping agreement will be for a short period of time, like 6 to 9 to 12 months. Anything longer than 12 months, and I usually start to be like, what are you doing, right? Like that's a lot of time for you to, you know, be developing something. And they can be no money, totally fine, depending on the relationship. A shopping agreement, you know, is typically for a shorter period of time. They have a provision in there that says, if I find a buyer, if you know, I get a Netflix interested, then at that moment in time, I will negotiate my deal, and you, author, will negotiate your deal directly with the buyer, and that's when we do an option. So they're related, but they're different tools for different parties, and you as the author are sort of in a position to say, look, I don't really want to option my material to this writer,
This person,
like him, but that ties up the material for a long period of time, and you're negotiating a lot of things that'll be very dependent on the buyer. So you can sort of kick that can down the road. You don't have to do all of that now. You can see what they come up with, that sales tool. You can see the traction that they have. You can see, or that they get. You can let their agent do that legwork. And then at the end of the day, you'll be asked to negotiate directly for those rights directly with the buyer, directly with the studio. And that is a better position. You don't have to get into reversion, and that the kinds of terms that you'd be negotiating with the buyer vary so widely from studio to network to distributor, that this random writer might have experience at a couple of places, but he or she won't know the full panoply of how to make it as marketable as possible. So why spend your money, your time, your energy negotiating out a full option agreement when you're dealing with an individual or a producer or a writer or director? Don't bother. You can just do a shopping. And then at the end of it, if they haven't figured out a buyer, they haven't found anyone for it, you get your property back, and whatever they've developed, they can't use, right? Because they don't have the underlying rights, and you just go on your merry way.
Now, you used a key term, reversion, which
Yes.
we use a lot in our draft publishing agreement, and we talk a lot about reversion of your publishing rights at the Authors Guild. Now, say the worst case scenario happens and you've optioned and the film or TV studio decides that, you know what, we've changed our minds, we're not going to do it anyway.
Mhm.
What rights does the author have under this option agreement or under an option agreement?
So under an option, if they have decided to pass on the material before they exercise the purchase price, you pocket the option money and you go on your merry way. Nothing happens. The rights have never actually effectively transferred to the studio or the network. If typically the trigger for paying a purchase price is the green light, right? Or so commencement of principal photography, right? So that's sort of typical. They have a budget, they've locked down the cast, they've got everything done. Principal photography commences, the purchase price is, the option is exercised and they pay you the purchase price. It comes out of the budget. That means they're shooting, right? So if they shoot, okay, so I'll take it this way. They decide to shoot a pilot, right? They shoot a pilot and the pilot, they try to sell the pilot and the pilot doesn't go anywhere. There is a period of time after which they finally say like, okay, yeah, we're not going to order this to series, or say it's internal. They don't want, it's a studio and a distributor. It's Paramount Plus. We don't want to order this to series. We shot the pilot, but it doesn't really fly. It's testing badly. We're not going to make a series. After a period of time, usually it's like 18 months to 2 years, the rights that you've granted to them, the TV rights or the film and TV rights, whatever you've granted, return to you. And then from there, if they make a series of television, just one season, after a period of time, the rights come back to you. They can still exploit the series that they made, right? They can still distribute it. They can still, show it on their channel, like one season of television. Same thing with 2 years, right? That there's a period of time and it comes back. A good example would be the excellent Netflix adaptation of The Babysitter's Club, which my daughter is still complaining that there's not going to be a third season. And she has told me on no uncertain terms that next time I do a deal with Netflix, I need to tell them that they need to bring back. It's great. It's excellent. There are only 2 seasons. So ostensibly, after a period of years, and they say, we're no longer doing any more seasons of this show, those rights go back. Now, studios and networks, especially in the last 5 years, have gotten much, much less generous about at what point the rights don't revert. And so the game for me, I have to play with them is how many seasons of television, for example, do you need to make before the TV rights do not revert back to my client? And that varies widely depending on the network. The funniest part about this, because the universe is hilarious, is that 10 years ago, I would negotiate, set periods of time after every season and say like 5 or more seasons of television are made. The rights revert after 5 years from the last episode, exhibition of last episode. So they always would revert no matter what. But those were the days when studios and networks would make more than 3 seasons of television. As a matter of course, right? Now we're in this weird world where, forgive me, if Netflix's algorithm says something doesn't make sense, they don't make a 3rd season of Babysitter's Club, which I cannot understand. But, all jokes aside, it's pretty rare these days that anything gets beyond a 2nd season or a 3rd season. So knowing that, if I'm doing a deal with Netflix and they say, okay, the rights won't revert after 4 seasons of television are made, I can live with that maybe, right? Because the chances of us getting there are pretty slim, even with a successful show. And if we do get there with 4 seasons of television, that's a champagne problem. They're in the business of making your show and they want to keep making it. That's a good problem to have. You're going to continue to get paid. So that's sort of the tension there with reversion. Here's a cap. Now, this is a caveat. This has happened to me once in 17 years, and I literally think about it all the time because it's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. This does not happen anymore because of the economics have changed rapidly in the last 5 years, but I had a client who came to me with a deal already done for one of the gems in his library of IP.
Mhm.
And he had made a TV deal more than 10 years ago. So before TV really became, very,
As
very
prestigious as it is.
exactly. It was not, it's like, oh, TV, I'm going to settle for TV. People wanted to do film. So he had, with another lawyer, had sold, in fact, I don't think it was a lawyer. I think he did it through his agency, which, refer back to what I said.
Mhm.
And they had built in a extremely low purchase price for the TV rights to this gem in his library.
Mm.
And it was delayed and it was force majeure for one reason or another. And so by the time it was really had come to me, and this client had come to me as a new client, it was sort of a legacy deal. And I'm thinking like, well, eventually this option is going to run out and they're going to stop coming up with ideas to keep it. We're going to be fine. We'll get it back because they haven't exercised. Well, we were told in November of whatever year, you know what? Yeah, we're passing. This project is dead. It's not going anywhere. You guys are going to get it back in May. And we were like, great. So the agent starts preparing, like, this is a jewel in his IP library. Like, this is great. We're going to pitch it. May rolls around and I get a call from the network saying, actually, so-and-so's husband loves this property and we kind of want to do it, but we don't really have a plan. And the purchase price is only, and it was only 60 grand. And they said, well, if we exercise, then we have 5 more years to develop before the rights revert to you. And it was my hair went on fire, my skull split. And I, basically said, if you do this without a plan, without a green light, without any sort of development, if you take this property off the market, you will never do business with this firm again. You will never do business with this agency again. You will never get anything from this writer again. You can kiss it goodbye. And we had a little game of chicken for a long time, too long. It felt like a year, probably only 3 days, but it felt like a year. And they ultimately were like, okay, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't do that. That would be bad. That was by the grace of God, because they had every right in the world to do that. So that is another reason why why the economics have to be at least a little bit prohibitive, so that these huge corporations cannot dig into their development war chest and pay
Just buy something and sit on it.
That's right. So be very mindful of, and again, that's why you have people like me. That's why you have agents. We're all aware of this possibility. The likelihood now in our economy now of doing that kind of thing is very low. It's so low. It's just TV rights are now they're not cheap, right? They're not, you're not going to get anything, or you should never sell anything, an article, anything for less than 150,000, 200 grand. You really shouldn't, because of this potential problem. So again, this was a function of the economy and the industry changing very rapidly over a small period of time, and then this option just for whatever reason or another extending beyond. So it's my horror story that I say when we talk about reversion. This is why the purchase price is so important, is you want to make it something that a budget has to handle versus a development fund. They're sort of slush fund that they can spend on developing. You need to make it significant. And now we're in a universe where options are 60 grand. So,
it's less likely to happen, because if you make it, the prices are higher.
Less likely to happen. Now, you don't want to price your material out of the market, But you want to be mindful that, you know, your property has value. It has value before a writer or director, anyone touches it. It is a valuable thing. It is a precious thing. And you want to make sure that that weird things happen. Now, again, this has happened once in 17 years, but I cannot forget about it. And I think about it every single time I make a deal now. And I have to think to myself, is there a way for a studio to get this buyer to get around and hold on to something that we don't want them to hold on to? And, you know, that is my worry. I metabolize all that stress for you, but that is one of the things I worry about. So reversion is very important. It also has to, again, reflect the industry and the customs and the norms. So don't die on the hill of this has to revert to us no matter what. If you're dealing with Netflix, don't die on that hill, but be aware and be thinking about, what do I really want from this? And what am I willing to let go? What's my base level of comfort? That's an important question.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you, I hate to poke at that pain, but over the years, you've seen a lot of red flags of things that if you fail to negotiate it properly, or if you let it slide, this can be a big problem. Can you give us a few of the things that, yes, this is a hill you should die on, or however you'd like to put it?
So I think the biggest concern that when I'm dealing with intellectual property, so it's been something that has been published before in its original form. That could be a novel, that could be a comic book, graphic, whatever it might be. I consider that to be its purest form, right? So your version, your book, your comic, whatever, your podcast, whatever it is, exists in the world in its most perfect form. That someone wants to come and adapt it into something else, into another form, is a derivative. So you need to make sure that you are entitled and can continue doing what you want with your property in its most perfect form. So you have to reserve. For me, the biggest red flags to look out for are going to be reserved rights. There is Cheryl and I were talking about this before, but we live in a hellscape of constant innovation when it comes to new ways for people to, take intellectual property that's yours and make it something else. 2 years ago, my particular hellscape was NFTs, and I was holding that tsunami back. There was a time, perhaps when I first started, I think it was live stage. So there was always these rights that you would say we're going to reserve publishing rights. Obviously, this is a book. We're going to reserve publishing rights. We're going to reserve radio. We're going to reserve live stage and live television. So these are things that were not a fight. We never had to fight with a studio or a network to say these things were reserved. We're keeping them from ourselves. All of a sudden, I don't know what happened overnight. All of a sudden, studios were taking the position, oh, no, we need live stage. We're taking live stage. And I was like, what are you going to do? This on ice? What are you talking about? Live stage. And so after a while, you start saying no, and they have to come back to you, and you say no, and you hold the line, and they come up with, okay, well, we'll give you a royalty. The idea is you don't want studios to grab what they want willy-nilly if those things are revenue generating. Live stage can be a very big revenue generator. And so the idea is that you need to meaningfully participate in the revenue generated off of your property. However that might be, right? Whatever is necessary. Now it is standard that when you say you can't have live stage, the studio says, we'll give you a royalty. And you go, okay, That's all we were really talking about. If you want to exploit that right, studio, then you need to give us a royalty. We need to participate meaningfully in the product that you are creating from our material. So this happens, you know, sometimes without us really even knowing. And it is, again, it's the stress that I metabolize for my clients, trying to figure out, oh, what do they want now? And trying to figure, okay, is this something that my client wants to exploit on their own? Is it something that I care? Do we care about this? This merchandise is a big thing in the comic book industry. And we're talking about posters and pins and commissioned art and t-shirts, apparel, you know, stuff that is an absolute mistake on the balance sheet of a studio. But it's meaningful money to the author themselves and the artist. So I have spent my entire career, it feels like, reserving book-based merchandise and creating this category called classic merchandise. And most places are very comfortable so long as we don't, you know, compete with each other. Video games are the same kind of thing. You can reserve those rights so that you can adapt that, you can exploit those rights yourselves. Again, as long as they don't compete with the thing that the studio is making, you're probably good. 2 years ago, the NFT, I guess 2.5, the NFT hell began, and studios were just taking the position, oh, we want the NFT rights to the book. And I would say absolutely not, period. Particularly because I think they're nonsense, but also because they're not a thing, and they're not something that is a very popular thing, particularly in the comic book industry. They're maligned. The art world has figured out a way to do it without being in a really cool and innovative way. That's great, but when you have somehow, I have yet to see in my you know, client base anyone doing anything even remotely interesting with an NFT. So what I ultimately do is say to them, you may, studio, create NFTs based on, you know, whatever you're doing, but you can't use my client's book. You can't use my client's art. You can't use the text of the copyright. You can't use the illustrations. You can't use anything related to the book. And I can hold that line. And I've held it pretty solidly. Thankfully, that is really has stopped being a real thing. I've seen a massive, you know, cratering of any of those. Podcasts is another one. So that's becoming more, although the market is becoming quite saturated. So we're seeing a little softness in the podcast market. But one of the things that radio, no one has to say, I'm reserving radio. What does that even mean anymore? I don't know. And so studios want to be able to do podcasts they're calling companion podcasts to a television show or a feature. And those are fine. Again, they're related to the thing they're making, and it can only help you. But I like to try at least to reserve podcasts based on the property.
The underlying property.
Yeah, I like to reserve those if I can, because again, it should be within the author, especially if it's let's say it's a true crime book that you've written, or it's a memoir, or something that is your human experience. You are a key piece of that story and telling that story. Your identity and you as the author is important. Reserve those rights. Dramatic podcasts, that's becoming a thing. Again, it's a question of, okay, if you do that though, what's my involvement? So that's a great segue into what we call frozen rights. And frozen rights simply mean, here are sort of categories of things that we may want to do in the future, but we have to come to each other to make an agreement before they can be exploited. Podcasts, generally speaking, are of limited or really speculative financial value. They could either be wildly successful or an absolute loss leader. Right? So, and you don't know what that's going to be from the jump. So sometimes the best way, if you don't know, is not to die on a hill, but simply to say, let's freeze these. And if you studio want to develop this later, you come to us and we'll make a deal. That sometimes is I think a good diplomatic way to handle the I don't knows of these kinds of rights. Cheryl and I, before this began, we were talking about AI. And I mean, I could probably do a whole hour on it. But that is also one of those things that 6 months ago, I would have never have thought. But I now have gone through all of my agreements and looking at language and thinking, oh my God, can someone use this, this thing to train an AI model? And that is something I think it is the next frontier.
It certainly is for us.
Yes. And so those are the kinds of things, like as the world changes and shifts around us so rapidly, that for me, the red flags in an agreement will be whenever a studio says, we want these and we won't even negotiate. We won't slice and dice. That's to me a red flag. Unless you're dealing with like the Disneys of the world, which you just have to expect it from them. So again, like, know you're the devil, right? But at the end of the day, like, you have to, if somebody wants more than they're willing to pay for, that's a red flag to me. I often say, if you want to pay 200 grand, you're going to get 200 grand of material. You want to pay more than that, you can get more than that. And so if someone says, okay, look, my budget's 200 grand, then you say, cool, here's what you can reasonably get for that. That's fine, but I need to reserve X, Y, and Z, and I need to freeze these categories, and then, then we can stay within your budget. There's always a deal to be made, but if somebody is saying, I'm going to pay you bargain basement, like I'm going to pay 60 grand, and then, right, and then say I'm going to take everything, that is to me a big red flag. So knowing kind of what your property can do, realistically can do. I have clients that say, Kaylin, I'm not making a merch out of this. Right? There's no merch to be had, so I'm not fighting that fight. Totally perfectly reasonable response. I will never pressure my clients into a position they don't want to be in. No good lawyer will. The point is knowing what your property can and cannot do. And it's okay to dream big, but just being realistic about, like, this wouldn't be a great candidate for merch. This wouldn't be a great candidate for a video game. I hear that a lot. I'm not going to fight it. We can grant those things.
Okay, great. And Johnny, do we have time for any questions?
Hi, yeah, let's get to a few questions. Thanks everyone. Yeah, a very engaged audience tonight. So first of all, how do you find a film or TV agent? This is something a lot of people ask. Is there a place to go or a badge to look for to know who to trust?
That's a great question. I would say there is a reality that is a catch-22 in Hollywood, they say, which is you can't get an agent without selling something first, and you can't sell anything without an agent. So it is definitely a very high, bar of access. But you can talk to people you can talk to your publishing agent. They might have people that they work with that they trust and they like. You can talk to people that hey, do you like your agent? Do you feel like they could give good attention to you? Like that kind of thing. There are always going to be, like, you'll know about the big ones, right? CAA, UTA, WME. I have clients at all of those places. I've had clients at those places that have been left. because it really is about what kind of relationship you want with that person. So, you know, if you want to be at a place where it's huge and they can sort of package your material together with other elements and sell it, that's a great place to go. You know, those big ones are a great place to go. But I would ask your publisher. There are these strange, I wish I remembered the name of them, but it's like these it's almost like speed dating, where you pay a fee to talk and pitch to an agent. Stay away from those.
Yes.
Those are scams. Anytime you are paying for access to an agent, it is a scam. A lot of some agencies will have methods and ways you can reach out and pitch, but I'm not going to deny that it is a very high bar. So sometimes some of the best ways to get an agent is sort of as it all happens together. Sometimes a client will come to me and say, oh, I have this friend who has this screenplay and it's amazing. Will you read it and let me know if anybody, you can think of anyone that might be interested? It's possible that I do that sometimes. I don't do it a lot because it doesn't matter if I creatively like anything. That doesn't matter. What matters is that the agent does. So that is also another way you can ask, you know, your lawyers you might have a relationship with. But for me, the best way is through the person who knows the material, your publishing agent, who knows the material and loves it, clearly loves it. They love you and they believe in your material. So they will have connections to people who are in film and TV, and those relationships are pretty good. They come with references, right? Other than that, it's a very hard thing to do. It would be great, Cheryl, at some point, I don't know, we might consider like people that I know that, you know, agents I know and work with that work in this space, we might yank them into a panel. Maybe we don't even tell them what they're doing, right? That might be fun.
Write that
to
down.
hear from them, like how do you get new clients? How do you find? Sometimes they do the same thing producers do, right? That they walk into a bookstore and they call them up. That happens a lot too. It's a great question. I wish I had a better answer.
Oh, that's great. Should authors be worried much about their ideas and stories being plagiarized or stolen while they're shopping around? You know, you see news articles about accusations of that happening.
You know, look, for whatever concern you might have of that, email has made it very difficult for that to really be successful. And the reason is you have a document, some documentation that I sent this pitch to so-and-so on this day. How do they get around that? And it was opened. You know, that it used to be a lot riskier when we would do it with, mailing stuff in, right? Well, prove it. Prove it that the person got it. Prove it that the person read it. That you send it to the CAA mailroom, right? Like, prove it. It's much easier now with, with email to document that you've made contact with someone. Also, on the flip side, many times, a lot of my author clients, agents that I know won't take blind submissions because they're like, look, brains are sticky, so I won't read anybody else's stuff, right? Because they're afraid. And I think a lot of writers feel this way. They're like, look, sticky brain syndrome is a real thing. You'll see something, it'll get in your head and it'll percolate, and sometimes you forget where the idea came from. That's natural, right? And that is no malintent, right? That is just, that happens. But on the flip side, you have studios who will have, if you submit to us, please understand that we have a billion things in development and a lot of them could be exactly like your story. And by submitting this and you clicking this box, you disclaim and waive any sort of claim that we have taken your thing if we don't pay you for it. So in a way, the answer is more practical. They have all figured out a way around. If someone's going to steal your thing, they're going to steal your thing. And it happens, it doesn't happen as much as you think. And the reason being that there's ideas out there, there's all sorts of stuff swirling. It just because it sort of resembles, I have yet to see, and maybe one of my partners who does litigation on this could probably have a better, more fulsome answer, but I have yet to see that really be a concern. But you save something on your computer, it has a timestamp. There's metadata that exists. Some people like register. You don't have to be a member of the WGA, for example, to register a spec script. You can register your a screenplay or a teleplay you write. You can register with the WGA for a very tiny fee, and it exists there in the world, right? There's a record of it. You don't have to be a WGA member to do that. I don't know if it's as big of a concern. Everyone thinks that their idea is the most perfect idea in the whole wide world. And the reality is that yes, it probably is, but chances are there is something very similar out there. Is that plagiarism? Not unless you can show that that person saw it and they took it. So there are ways that our world tracks everything we do, whether we like it or not. So use it to your advantage for once.
A lot of people asked about getting hired on as a screenwriter and things like that. We talked a little bit about stipulations like
Adapting your own work.
Right, adapting your own work.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some realistic ways that the author can, get a job as a screenwriter or otherwise retain, meaningful control over the production?
Meaningful control is harder, right? There is a thing called key creative consultation that you can negotiate into your work or into your deals to say, like, look, you're going to come to me with any key creative changes and consult with me with respect to key creative. And that can mean anything from script to key cast, director, showrunner, that kind of thing. That's important if that's important to you. But remember when I said your version of it is the most perfect version. That is your version, the one you had control over. When you option your material to a third party, there are things that are going to change and you might not like them. But always understand that you have your most perfect version. The way you want it exists in the world and they can never take that away. So if someone doesn't like the movie they made out of your book, they can go to your book and it's going to boost your sales, right? You're going to feel that uptick when you have a TV series or a television show or a film made out of your book. You're probably going to make more money out of the boost in publishing than out of whatever the studio is going to give you. So now, adapting your own work is tricky. It can happen. And it kind of goes in waves. Like there are times and periods of time where I can say, look, my guy wants first opportunity to adapt this adapt the pilot, first crack at the pilot. And depending on the relationship that they have with the creative exec that brought the project into the studio, that could be a yes. They might get someone to rewrite you, but it's always worth asking. If you've never written a pilot or a screenplay before, you've only written novels, you've only written comics, that's going to probably be a no, right? So if you can write your own material, adapt your own material, make sure that you have a sample to show. That helps, right? Maybe that's an exercise for you. Figure out how to adapt something that you love, that you've written, adapt it on your own into a pilot or a screenplay. There's lots of information out there about how to do that. Page count is a minute, 1 page per minute, right? So if you're writing a pilot that is 60 minutes long, it's got to be 60 pages. That's the rough kind of estimate. 120 pages for a feature. Don't be Quentin Tarantino, right? 120 pages. That's all you need to do. But so try it. Try out that different format. It is a different muscle than writing a book. You know, what you do is special, but also what screenwriters do is special too. So some people can do both. I represent a lot of hyphenates that can adapt their own work, direct their own work, do all that stuff. That happens over time. And sometimes you can say like, hey, I'll co-write this with this screenwriter that's very experienced. And then you get experience co-writing. And then on the next project, we can leverage that into adapting your own material. But if you have no experience in writing your own material or writing a pilot or a screenplay, that can be an ask. Never hurts to ask, but generally speaking, it probably won't work the first time unless you have something to show them that they fall in love with, or you have a creative exec that just will do it. I don't know if Laura Dave has ever written for the screen. I know her husband, Josh Singer, is a screenwriter. They did the last thing he told me, her book, they adapted her book into the TV series that's now on Apple. And I was very pleased to see that, right? The woman who wrote Fleischman's in Trouble, you could have knocked me over. She wrote that whole thing. And she had no experience, as far as I know, in writing for television until she adapted that for Hulu. That's incredible. So just ask. And if you have a creative executive team that believes in you and loves the material and wants to get to yes, they will give you the shot. And if you nail it, great, good for you. If they have to hire someone on to rewrite you, good for you. You tried, right? That is not a bad thing either. It never hurts to ask, but it really is important to manage your expectations on that point.
We should wrap up soon, but a couple important questions about terminations, reversions. Say your publisher has the rights, but they're not doing anything, or they're, it's just taking too long. Is it easy to get them reverted or buy them back?
In a publishing agreement? Well, I would say it depends on what you've negotiated to start. I'm seeing a lot. There wasn't a lot of change over a period of years in these provisions. And then all of a sudden we had print on demand and electronic versions of books. And the most movement I've gotten in the last, 20 years on publishing deals has largely been to say, you need to have, X number of sales, fewer than, X number of print copies sold. And just Xing out that notion of electronic or print on demand completely, because that's just not fair, right? You can also set, oops, Siri, my watch just had an opinion about that. Cheryl, didn't you guys say at AWP, there's you can also set a financial, if the royalty.
Yes, that is what we do. And actually we've got some language in our model book contract, which is available online.
Yeah.
So you really, as Caitlin was saying, you have to look back at what the terms were that you agreed to. Also, that's something that the Authors Guild, if you're a member, we may be able to help you reach out to your publisher and get the rights reverted depending upon what your agreement says. We do recommend that we have set some standards, saying that you have to sell a certain number of, not a certain number of books, but you have to make a certain, I think that's $250 per quarter in terms of sales of the book. Because otherwise publishers may say, oh, well, it's a print on demand, it's never going out of print. No, that's unacceptable.
Or electronic, you can get it on an ebook. No, that's also unacceptable.
What about getting out of shopping agreements? Because several people asked about that. What if you get an option from someone else out of nowhere while you're in a shopping agreement? Can you get out of the shopping agreement?
No, they're exclusive. So again, it's important to be mindful of the length of time. And if somebody comes to you and says, oh, we want to option this, you say, the rights to this are exclusively under, being shopped by X person, you may reach out to them. Or you can say they're under, an exclusive option agreement or shopping agreement right now. Come back when you are, on X date when it expires. But exclusive means exclusive. So if you've given someone the exclusive right to shop your material, you cannot switch around that. You'll be in breach if you do that.
Finally,
Which
with
is a
the
bad thing.
WGA, right? With the WGA strike going on, those in solidarity should not engage with options right now and wait till the strike's over, or is everything just kind of at a standstill anyway?
I love this question. It makes me happy because we do need solidarity right now. Strikes are miserable for all writers, miserable things, but we are at an existential crossroads right now. So I appreciate this question so much. One of the things for authors that are not members of the Guild to keep in mind is that if you option your material right now, we talked about time periods like 18 months, 12 months, you enter into an option period. All option periods, whether you like it or not, can be told, meaning paused automatically by force majeure events. These are events that are flood, pandemic, right? Fire, labor strikes. So you will sit there and you will be negotiating, your option for 18 months, 12 months, and your option fee paid, and then the moment you enter into an option period right now, while the WGA is on strike, the studio will say, we're on pause, force majeure, and they will get a period of free time for the length of the labor strike. So even if you're not a member of the WGA and you are not prohibited by the WGA to option your book, your comic book to a buyer right now, but keep in mind that they will get a very long period, wherever long the strike is, of free time out of you, under which they are under no obligation to develop, spend a dime, or pay the option fee. I mean, they probably will pay the option fee because that'd be stupid, but that'll be it. So if it lasts for 6 months, you've done all this care and attention to negotiating your 18-month window, just add 6 months onto that before they have to pay you another dime. So in solidarity, right, if that's, there's that moral and ethical perspective, but there's also a really practical legal one. The minute you enter into an option for your material, it's the pause button's on, and the studios know that, and they're hoping you don't. And they're hoping you don't have someone like me going, don't you do, no, we're not selling something right now, because again, we don't know. The WGA strike is going on right now. I don't know when it's going to end.
The DGA and SAG-AFTRA are coming up with their contracts.
SAG-AFTRA, their contracts, exactly, Cheryl. Their contracts expire June 30th, both of them, and they're currently negotiating right now. And frankly, we share way too many issues with the WGA. The WGA, the DGA, and the SAG all have the same existential issues in front of them right now. Do we think that the Alliance is going to all of a sudden make a deal with the DGA that makes so much sense with all this pressure on the DGA to hold the line? Are they going to really make a deal with SAG that's so much better? No, they're going to do the same thing they've been doing. So potentially we have a triple strike. And the Teamsters are supporting us, and the Teamsters aren't even on strike. And I keep saying us because, a lot of my clients are WGA members. The father of my child is a WGA member. He is currently picketing right now all over the city. It's an important thing for this town and for our industry in general. And so I appreciate the solidarity, but even if you don't have to think about it in a solidarity, just think about it from that practical perspective of why start a clock when you know they're going to punch that pause button the second you sign.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask one more question because a few people wanted to know about dollar amounts and such, but Someone asked, when you talk about the purchase price, is that expressed as a range of a floor price and a ceiling price, or is there a single set purchase price?
For TV, it's typically set, right? It's in the US market. It can be a range in the British market, but that's really complicated. In the US market, it's a set price, X dollars. The first option payment they paid is deductible against that purchase price. The second extension is not. So you'll see applicable, non-applicable, that's what that means. In the film context, so if you're making a deal for a film, or maybe it's an option, it's a cafeteria. They can either develop for TV, and this is the purchase price, develop it initially for film. It's usually 2.5% of the ingoing budget with a floor that resembles the TV purchase price, or a ceiling. So that depends on the big budget. So it kind of protects you from, having an enormous budget and them only paying you $250. It also protects the studio because they have to make a budget, and the purchase price has to sort of be in proportion, but not be insane. So that's a great question. Feature film prices or purchase prices are typically 2.5% of the budget with a floor and a ceiling. Sometimes you'll see a flat fee, but those are pretty rare.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, Caitlin and Cheryl, thank you so much for doing this. To our audience, we'll send a follow-up email with the recording and a link to our literary option agreement. Cheryl, anything else?
No, just thank you again, Caitlin. And we will definitely bear in mind your kind offer to reach out to film and TV agents,
Yes. Oh, yeah. You got that on recording now, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a good idea. I'm thinking about it. It's a pretty good idea. Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure, as always. Authors Guild is so great. You're such a great partner, and thank you for inviting me. This is fun.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.